Hey everyone, welcome back to the Whirling Circles Internal Martial Arts Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Garcia, with, of course, as always, Frank Allen and John Molinar. We are doing a recap show of stuff that happened at UFC fights that this past weekend, and we just started talking a bunch before the show. So again, as always, I'm like, let's start the record. So hopefully we'll get that into the conversation. But before we start the convo, let's check in. Frank, how you feeling this week?
I'm all right.
You got your T-shirt on, ready for the spring?
Oh yeah,
Nice shirt.
my first knife fight.
Nice. And Frank got a lot of knives, so for those who don't know. John, how you feeling?
I'm good. Good. Happy, happy. I just went outside for a couple moments and it's really warm out. So like t-shirt weather.
Yeah, New York City, when we're recording this, it's like in the 60s. Is this the first time of the year that's in the 60s? Or did it hit
I
it?
think so.
I think so, right? Well, definitely the first time that is in the 60s and sunny. So that is nice. I'm ready to get back outside. We talked about this a couple episodes ago. But just I'm realizing too, like a lot of my social events, since I can't do indoor social events, all rely on being able to be outside with people. And there's nothing worse than like trying to, eat a bagel and drink a coffee and talk to a friend when it's negative 20 degrees out. So I'm excited for it. All right, cool. So let's get into it then, just because we already started the conversation. So for those who don't know, a few weeks ago we did like a fight prediction preview show on UFC 259 that happened on Saturday, March 6th. So hopefully you were able to get that to view that show and see some of our predictions, because one of us hit most of the win strikes. I just want to say, but we did that, and we wanted to do a recap on what was the first big card of the year for UFC. So do we want to start with the one that we were just talking about, the one that is the big debate now,
If
the
you want to go
bantamweight
there
title?
immediately,
Yeah, maybe no. Let's start with the light heavyweight. Let's do it like we did before. Let's start our way down, kind of thing, and then we'll spend some time on the bantamweight fight, because I feel like the featherweight, women's featherweight fight is gonna be pretty quick. But um, but yeah. So with the light heavyweight fight, Jan Blachowicz, did I get it? Yeah, there we go. Was facing Israel Adesanya, who was coming up in weight class. Israel is the middleweight champion, was coming up to light heavyweight to challenge Jan, who had just secured the title in his last fight. So this was Jan's first defense of the title. And coming into it, like right on fight night, Jan was the underdog. So the champion was the underdog. And so yeah, how would you feel about that fight? What did it work out the way we thought it was going to work out? The first loss for Israel in his UFC career.
well, it wasn't the exciting bang up that people were looking for at all. But I wasn't really surprised because I think this Polish power thing has been a bit overplayed. Um, Jan Blachowicz can knock people out, but he's no Francis Ngannou. He's no Derek Lewis. He's no George Foreman. He's not one of those guys that can just barely touch you and you're out. And in fact, if you look at his record, he has about even knockouts and submissions, and he actually has one more submission than he does knockouts.
Hmm.
And if you look at his history, his first martial art was at 9 years old. He started in judo. So his knockout power was a little bit overplayed. And it appeared to me that perhaps Adesanya isn't bringing his power up in weight that he had at middleweight. Maybe he was just tentative, but either he was tentative or he didn't bring the power up. And of course, it ended up with a very, very technical match, with both of them being very technically proficient, and working out that the big guy, being technically proficient with his weight, sort of won it with his size and grappling, and was not the bang up that we're looking for at all. But if you like technical fighting, it was interesting to see the underdog, slightly larger guy just use his weight efficiently and go to his grappling, not buying into his own hype of being such a knockout puncher, which might have got him losing a decision, and went ahead and took it.
Yeah, I mean, really, he in those last two rounds, especially for those who didn't see it, it was mostly on the ground. Israel had fairly good ground defense, but the size and the skill from Jan was able to keep the dominant position. So even though there wasn't much damage done on the ground, it was a dominant kind of technical performance and really like a champion mindset, I think, on Jan's part. And I was really happy that he pulled it out. I in our predictions I said Jan, but I also wouldn't have been mad if Israel won because I'm a big fan of Israel. But I think you're right. It was like technique wise, they were both like equal par, high level, and so the size and the ground game worked out. I was very interested though on Israel because Israel in the fight, in the work up to the fight, Israel's known as a kickboxer, a Muay Thai guy, knockout power, all that kind of stuff. But he was kind of hinting that he also had been working on his ground game to try to get a submission because he wanted to prove to the world that he could win this fight by a submission or on the ground, and that just didn't play out. I don't think his grappling skill was even close to Jan's.
Well, there's a difference of a striker coming into MMA and learning grappling and somebody who started grappling at 9 years old. And it just showed there.
John, what was your impression? Me and you were watching it together, but
Right. So I'm trying to remember in the first 3 rounds. I mean, it certainly was not one-sided but Adesanya was sort of doing a bit better in the striking, at least, right? Like there was back and forth, but I would have guessed that for at least 2 of those rounds, Adesanya was a bit stronger in the grappling.
Striking.
I'm sorry, in the striking. But I certainly, as it was playing out, even though I predicted that Adesanya would win, watching it play out, I started to actually cheer for Blachowicz because you could almost see like Adesanya would have been perfectly happy to make it a points fight, basically, to sort of dance at range and, not even pick him out or pick him apart for a finish, but just sort of like stay out of the grappling and just get points. So I certainly don't mind that Jan switched and went to the grappling. And I actually was changing my feeling during the fight, starting to cheer for him.
yeah. So the strike numbers, Jan had 184 versus Israel's 99 significant strikes, 107 to Jan, and then 78 only for Izzy. But some of those happen on the floor too. 3 takedowns for Jan, nothing for Izzy. And 3 out of 5, that's significant, right? So Israel is one of these guys who flaunts his takedown defense, but he got taken out 3 out of 5 times. So I think that is telling that Jan too, his hand game was really strong because he had Israel kind of apprehensive, like you were saying, Frank, being more calculated and was able to get those nice takedowns.
Yep, I think that's the story of that fight.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Jan coming out of that proves that he is the champion and that he deserves to be there. And hopefully he'll start getting a little bit more respect in that position. Israel, I think, lost with grace, lots of respect to Jan, didn't shit talk, didn't second guess the decision. I mean, he couldn't, but, other people in those positions.
Well, he could have.
Yeah. But I think he took the one loss and he kind of said it like, hey, for those who want to criticize and hate on me, I'm putting my name out there. I'm putting my record on the line. I'm doing that, and I thought that was really great on his part.
Yep, he's taking chances, and they both were like gentlemen about the fight in general, which is a good thing to see. It's too rare these days in fights that they both acted like complete sportsmen, gentlemen. And yes, he took his chance. He took his chance exactly. It's kind of like in the welterweight division when Garcia moved up to fight Errol Spence, and he was actually basically a lightweight. He's even pushing it when he fights junior welterweight, and he lost. But it's like he said, I'm going to fight the best there is. Period. I'm not going to mess around with any easy fights. I'm going to go for the best there is. And I think Adesanya was doing the same thing. He could have taken an easy middleweight title defense, and he chose instead to try and move up against the champion. So it was a really ballsy effort, and you got to give him kudos for that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. Nice. So yeah, so we'll move on to the next fight then, which was the women's featherweight title bout, and that again was between the champion Amanda Nunez, who is a double champion, one of the, I think it's only like 6 or 7 people in UFC history to hold 2 belts. So kind of what Israel was trying to be, Nunez is. And the odds were really in her favor against Megan Anderson, who was an Australian fighter, who's a really good fighter as well. But this thing ended quick. I think it was like a minute or two. Like, I forget the time, but it was very quick. And Megan only landed 2 punches.
It was like a non-contest.
Very, very much so. And John, you had a lot of feelings about like the fear you saw in Megan's eyes. You want to speak about that?
Oh, I remember we were talking as she walked in. There was sort of, she looked very focused and everything, but I don't know if it was basically after she got hit the first time. I don't know if it was reaction to power, but she was noticeably terrified within a few moments of the start of that fight. I don't know.
I think it was just.
Oh, go ahead, Frank.
I think it was just terrified. It was like frozen.
Right.
From the minute Nunez touched her, it's like exactly the phrase, deer in the headlights. She just couldn't do anything. Once she got touched, and she wasn't even touched that hard at full blast, or she'd have been out. But once she got touched and felt that power, for the rest of the fight, it was like a deer in the headlights. And it was kind of like Amanda decided to take it easy on her instead of pound her out, decide to submit her so that she wouldn't hurt her, is what it seemed like.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was Joe or DC. One of the commentators said, "You don't know until you know," and that's how I feel like Megan was like. People don't know how good Amanda is, or how strong she is, or just how skillful she is until they're in the ring. I mean, because you have fighters like this, once a generation, where this person is just at another level. There's no one that can really compete with them. And they think they can because they're beating everybody else to get to that championship fight. But that champion is so far ahead. And then you get in the ring and you get touched, you get hit, and you realize, oh shit, like this is not what I thought it was gonna be. And yeah, I mean, like noticeably, like her skin color kind of changed. She got like, I was just like, wow, this is
like white as a ghost.
Yeah, exactly. But
like you a few episodes ago.
Yeah, exactly. But I think too, like as a fighter, you face these monster champions, and you also too at that. I mean, there's a little bit of getting starstruck, kind of talk. We've talked about that in the past. She might have had a little bit of that, but definitely afterwards, I think she realized like, wow, I just got my ass delivered to me by one of the greatest fighters of all time. So that's pretty cool. At least she got to say she was in the ring with her.
The only complaint I have with Amanda's thing, and I don't know if it's her personally, but it's the UFC trying to push her as the greatest woman prize fighter in history. I think she's proven that she is the greatest woman MMA fighter in history, and it'll take a lot for somebody to match that. But calling her the greatest woman prize fighter really acts like Lucia Riker never existed. And there's just a difference there with Amanda, something like 21 or 22 and 4. You got to admit there's that and 4. Lucia Riker was 35-0-1 as a kickboxer. 35-1-1 if you want to count the one loss, but most people don't count that because that was to a guy. She never lost to a woman. And fighting women, she went In fact, fighting women and two men. She lost to one man, the other one she beat. So she went 35-0-1 as a kickboxer, and then came to the United States and went 17-0 with 14 knockouts as a boxer. And I think that's a record that hasn't been beat. And I don't think Amanda can beat it because she started off with those 4 losses on her record. So calling her the greatest woman prize fighter in history, I think really they're just trying to act like Lucia Riker didn't exist. But other than
Yeah.
that, there's no doubt that she's the greatest woman MMA fighter so far, and it's going to be really strange if anybody can ever eclipse what she's done, because not only has she held 2 titles, not only is she scaring people, but I think the big thing is she has beaten every single bantamweight and featherweight champion that the UFC has put out there. Every one of them. And in fact, Bellator's first featherweight champion was Julia Budd, and she fought Julia Budd early on, and they're both in the UFC, and knocked Julia out in less than a minute. Less than a minute. And the only other featherweight champion that Bellator has had is Chris Cyborg. And as we know, Amanda's the only person to knock out Chris Cyborg. So she's beaten all the bantamweight and featherweight champions in the UFC and all the featherweight champions in Bellator. And I think that's really more outstanding than the other stuff. But when you look at her record, she did have those 4 losses before she moved to top team. And they're there. You can't deny them.
Well,
And I
I think
think
that
that means that
yeah.
overall, for the best woman prize fighter, she doesn't stand with Lucia Riker.
I think her challenge, Amanda's challenge, is that she doesn't have any competition. I mean, like who do they put against her that makes, like, even Megan? We kind of walked into it like, maybe she'll put up a good fight, but she's definitely gonna lose. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's a challenge for someone like Amanda, trying to become, a prize fighter, or like, even with the 4 losses or whatever, just like making memorable fights and all this kind of stuff. Like, who can get in the ring to do that with her is a challenge for her. I did really love, though, in the lead up to the fight, her and her wife just had a new baby 5 months ago, and so she basically was like, all her pre-fight conversations were about her baby. She even grabbed her baby at the end, brought her baby in the ring. I thought that was really, really significant to show like a working mother. International Women's Day was on the 8th. This is, I think it's just a really good symbol and message, that, you have 2 lesbian mothers, right? So you have 2 queer women with a child. And I just liked all that symbolic imagery, kind of debunking a lot of the bullshit that manifests in the martial arts community, I think.
Well, talking about symbolic, I loved it when she said the lioness is more dangerous when she has a cub.
Yeah.
It's because she's known as the lioness. And I thought that was a great statement. And then she's walking around with her daughter. The lioness is more dangerous when she has a cub. And Valentina Shevchenko is probably the only person to give her a run for her money. Has given her a run for her money before, but that's not going to happen right away. Valentina's defending her title in the pay-per-view after next, which is sometime fairly soon in April, because the next pay-per-view is still this month. I think it's the 27th of March. Is going to be the heavyweight title and the featherweight title. But because Shevchenko's busy, they've already been talking about the next for Amanda is going to be Juliana Penne. And that's kind of too bad because I like Juliana. She's she's an announcer on one of the Spanish shows, Combate, I think it was, and she seems like she's just, she had a baby a year ago, and she seems like a very, very nice woman and a very, very competent fighter, and she's up for it. She's calling for the fight, but
yeah.
Oh well, she looks like she's next on the list.
Yeah. The one thing, the UFC has been talking about getting rid of the women's featherweight division and kind of consolidating the fighters into the other weight classes. So we'll see if that's even a featherweight fight and what happens. Like, even Nunez is ready to, if Dana asks her to retire the belt, like, so that's
a
an interesting
bantamweight fight.
Yeah, that
Everybody
would be the
said
bantam
that's a
fight. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
bantamweight fight. That's what Juliana Penne is. And as far as they don't have to integrate any fights, the reason they're talking about ending is because they don't have any featherweight fighters. They
Yeah.
had a few of them, and she already beat them all up, and no one else is running to join that division. And I think the only fighters that they have, if they still have them, people she's already beat. So it's like they don't have a division.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All right. So we'll see what happens there. All right. So let's move on to the next one. Unless, John, did you want to add anything? John, that was your first time seeing Nunez really in action, right?
You know what? I think I've seen her fight, but it's probably a couple years ago already. Frank, how did the Nunez fight go against Cyborg? Like, that's the only one that I actually think was interesting. I know she beat Cyborg, obviously, but Cyborg is somebody who, for years, people talked about her having this crazy power and everything. And so you would
Well,
have.
that's why it was so amazing. Within the first couple of minutes, they were up next to the cage and banging. And usually when Cyborg would start to do that, the other person would start to run. And Amanda stood there and banged with her and knocked her out.
Okay.
She knocked her out in like less than 3 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe less than two. And it's like they were standing there banging from both in the pocket, both going. And Amanda knocked her out early in the first round.
Yeah, it was like definitely a top 20 moment for me in UFC fights. Not because it was like the best win, but it was just so notable, like you're saying, John. Cyborg was this knockout queen, and no one could take her down. And Nunez just picked her apart. And Nunez said that her strategy was to get Cyborg mad because she felt that Cyborg was not a disciplined fighter once she got mad. So once she hits her, once you hit her in the nose or something, somewhere that she doesn't like, that she just starts pressing. And so Nunez had that in her mind, and her strategy was to try to catch her on that. I think she did.
Oh, yeah, she did. I
Yeah.
mean, Cyborg was out. There was no question. No, quick stoppage. No one, the word quick stoppage never even entered anyone's head. She took her out.
And she retired her UFC career after that, right? That's after
Well,
that she left, right?
yeah, but that was business stuff with her and
Yeah.
Dana. She and Dana never got along. And after that, I think Dana didn't want to give her anywhere near the money she wanted, and Scott Coker stepped in and offered it to her, and her contract was up. And it was actually a good business move for her. I don't
She'd
think
have the same
Cyborg's the type
leverage,
that
yeah.
ducks anybody. I think she'd be very happy if Amanda decided to go to Bellator and they fought again. But it was all, Dana's not the easiest guy to do business with.
Yeah. All right, cool. So yeah, so going to the bantamweight title bout. So this was Peter Yan. How do you say his first name? It's not Peter, right? It's Peter. Peter. It's
No,
like a little
it's
whatever.
a
So
We'll say
Russian thing, not a French thing.
yeah. We'll
Hmm?
say Peter Yan, whatever. Versus Aljamain Sterling. This was probably the one that had the most contention of the night in terms of like post fight discussions. For those who didn't see it, the first 3 rounds were handled pretty well by Jan. Maybe Sterling had one of them, but the fight cards were showing that Jan was winning the fight, whatever way you had that. But come the 4th round, a disqualification happened with an illegal knee while Aljamain Sterling was down. And all the tape afterwards, it was seen that actually Peter was asking his corner, do I hit or do I kick or something to that, and they said yes, go for it, or somebody did. He did the
That
illegal
was after the
knee,
blow was struck.
and then you can see half of his corner just like frustrated, like, oh no, what just happened? So I think there was some confusion from his corner. In any case, so Jan lost the belt because of disqualification. Sterling was concussed. The doctor diagnosed in the ring that he was concussed, and he was looking pretty shaken up. Some people think he was acting a little bit more than reality, but at the end of the day, the rules are the rules, and Jan got disqualified and lost that belt. So, yeah, Frank, what you were saying about the corner confusion happening after the kick?
No, the guy going yes, yes, yes was after the kick, after the knee. He
Well,
was apparently he thought that it was legal and he thought his guy had just won, but they show the guy pounding on the desk and going yes, yes, yes. That was after the knee was struck. But it was sad because it was a good fight coming into it, and it was a good fight during the fight. I think Sterling absolutely won the first round. I think the second round was questionable, but Jan kept the pressure on him, and wore him out. By the third round, he was fading, and he was fading fast. And by the fourth round, he was pretty much done. And Jan pretty much put him down, just forced him down in a grappling situation. But unfortunately, he couldn't even say continue a flow. I pulled it because they stopped. There was a significant stop. And the referee clearly said, he's down. I heard the referee say, he's down. So he'd gotten the referee's instruction that the guy was down. He shouldn't have been looking for his corner. The referee said, he's down. And he thought about it, looked around, and then wham, lands this wicked knee, which flattened Sterling. And I think he absolutely was not acting, because somebody that's acting doesn't then throw the belt on the ground and say he doesn't want it afterwards. He was concussed. He was hurt. He wanted to still fight. He didn't want it to end that way. But Jan, I don't know. His thing was at the beginning, was that, well, in the locker room, the ref was stressing the hands. So I looked at the hands and not the knee. If you're a professional fighter, much as a champion, you should know the rules of your game. You shouldn't be, oh, they didn't tell me the rules. This is your sport. It's your sport you've been fighting
Yeah,
for
it doesn't
years.
change from like state to state. That is a rule. You never
you
knee
should
someone
know
while
the
they're
rule.
down. Yeah.
Well, actually, it does change from state to state.
The knee on the knee when you're downed?
Not with both knees, which were down. But some of them say one knee, it's okay to hit them. But both knees were down. And the other thing is, if you're still fighting, if he thought the fight was still going, he wouldn't have been sitting there with his head hanging out. He would have at least had his hands up and covering himself. He was just didn't know what was going on. He was out of it when all of a sudden he got blasted with his knee that, as I said, you could see Jan thinks about it. There's a pause, and then he blasts the kid with the knee. And it's a mistake. I'm sure at the moment he didn't remember that it was a foul, because he wasn't looking to get disqualified. But by the rules, it's a, quote, blatant intentional foul. Blatant intentional fouls, you lose the match. Title fights, if it's called a loss, you lose the title. No matter what, a loss, you lose the title. If it's called a no contest or a referee stop, if it's called something else, maybe not. But if it's called a loss, and that was clearly a disqualification loss, you lose the title. It's happened in bigger fights. In 1930, Max Schmeling won the heavyweight championship of the world when Jack Sharkey smashed him in the crotch and he went down, he couldn't get up. You know, that's the way it is. If you get disqualified, and sure enough, Sharkey came back and a year later won the rematch and took the title. And I'm sure when Jan gets his rematch, he'll get the title. But as Chael Sonnen pointed out, the fact that all he did was get a loss and lose his title is actually pretty lucky and pretty easy when you consider that what could have happened, like when Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear. And a lot of people under the impression that he just sort of went crazy and did it and didn't pay any attention and didn't want to realize that the nice guy Holyfield had been headbutting Mike all night long. And Mike had complained to the referee, he's headbutting me, and the referee had refused to do anything until Mike lost his temper and bit him. Well, he didn't just get disqualified for the fight. He got disqualified. He got a hefty fine, and he got a suspension and couldn't fight for a while. And that's usually what happens with blatant intentional fouls. You lose the fight, and you get a suspension, and you get a fine. So the fact that not only did not get a suspension, he didn't get a fine, but he at least initially was told that he could get an immediate rematch, was they were taking it pretty easy on him. I mean, the guy who runs all the show, Dana, right afterwards says, we have to run this back right away. So,
yeah.
Of course, now there's a little confusion because Henry Cejudo wants to come back, and Cejudo looks like big money, and we all know Dana will go for whatever will make the most money. And Cejudo, in his triple championship by trying to throw his Olympic gold medal in with his 2 titles and claiming to be a triple champion. He's such an idiot.
Yep.
But and I'd hate to see him get to leapfrog Jan. I really want to see this rematch. The only thing I would like about him leapfrogging Jan is I think Sterling could conceivably beat Cejudo, because Cejudo doesn't punch like Jan does, and he's a wrestler, not a jiu-jitsu guy. But I'd really like to see this rematch. I hope Cejudo can't do it, but Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw immediately jumped in, trying to jump the line and get their shot at Sterling, and it'll be kind of sad if they do.
Well, some numbers here. So actually, the final numbers on strikes. So total strikes, 103 by Jan, 119 by Sterling. Significant strikes, 86 by Jan, 97 by Sterling. Takedowns, Jan had 7 recorded takedowns, but many of those takedowns were intentional kind of spills by the grappler, I feel. He was kind of like loose on his feet. Some of them were Jan throwing him off balance, but 7 takedowns versus 1 takedown by Sterling. So, John, before we even talk about the disqualification, you felt like Jan was handling the fight pretty well up until then, right?
Oh, yeah, I did. I mean, the mere fact that he was taking Sterling down again and again. Now, it wasn't typical like wrestling takedowns. It was, a lot of it was trips and sweeps and things like that. But I mean, it was clearly the first round was a very hard round. And I agree with Frank that Sterling probably won that, but I felt like from that point on, Jan was getting stronger and stronger, and Sterling was getting weaker and weaker. Like, he gassed, basically. He had a ton of energy in the first round, Sterling did. Maybe just excitement about the title fight, but like it looked almost like an adrenaline dump. Like, he basically, after the first round, he started to lose all the energy, and he just winded, and he didn't have a great game once he lost that manic energy.
Well, that strategy though of pressing Jan was working. He just couldn't maintain it, I think. But it was working because Jan's game was very much disrupted in the first round for sure, and I think in the second round as well. Yeah, he was. I mean, Jan wasn't getting anything landed, and I thought it was pretty good on Sterling's part, but he wasn't able to maintain it. Now, was he not able to maintain it because there was that adrenaline dump, which happens a lot of times for challengers and big fight, or was it just Jan is so efficient, which is
right.
And so efficient with his energy usage. Yeah, and then also too, Sterling was really wanting to get into the grapple, you could see. And Jan was not doing it. Jan was like, nope, I'm not going on the ground. That's not happening. So that was a good, high-level maneuver on Jan's part, not getting caught up in the moment and trying to prove to the world that he can grapple with Sterling. A lot of these fighters do that. He maintained his kind of position.
Just a point, medically, an adrenaline dump is a few seconds. There is no long thing. An adrenaline dump is you hit this adrenaline dump and you're good for 30, 45 seconds, a minute top, and then it wears out. And then that's what used to happen to Vitor Belfort in the early days. He knocked out many people in the first minute. But you could see if it didn't happen in the first minute, he would start to wilt. And the adrenaline dump is much faster than what happened, which gives more credit to Jan, because it wasn't an adrenaline dump. He just wore the guy out. I think it took him till the third round to do it, but by the third round, the guy was wasted. And that's why it's really sad the way it ended, because the guy's there kneeling. He could have punched him twice, and the referee would have stopped it, and he won. He could have swung around behind him, put on a rear naked choke, and the guy was too out of it to do anything, and it would have won. He had the fight in his hand and absolutely won. When for whatever reason, instead of doing anything logical, he does a blatant intentional foul and gets himself DQ'd. It was sad. It was really sad because he had that fight won at that moment. It wasn't that the fight should have been stopped. I don't even know why he paused and started looking around. He should have just punched the guy. Well, he was there. It was perfectly legal. It's MMA, for Christ's sakes. All he had to do was open up with a couple of his powerful punches, and it was over. Or step behind the guy and slap on a rear naked. It was over. Why he stopped, thought about it, listened to whoever, and then did an illegal blow is just stupid. It's really a stupid fighting maneuver at all. All he had to do was continue, and he had the fight won. And by the way, that thing of his corner is really weird. It was Khabib covering for Jan, who told him that in Russian he heard somebody in the corner tell him to kick. Well, the initial post fight, not the ring, not the raid after, but the first interview after that, they asked Jan about that, and he flat out denied it. He said, absolutely no. No one in my corner told me to kick. But, and went into this whole thing of the referee in
So
the hand,
Khabib might have been,
trying to help the Russian.
yeah.
Either that or
yeah.
the guy said it in Russian and Khabib heard it and Jan didn't. That's also a possibility.
Yeah. So Jon, you've seen harder strikes. You feel like there was a little bit of acting going on there, or not acting, but a little overplay to not get back in the fight. You've seen harder fights. You were saying
what I felt like watching it, and I haven't rewatched it, but what I felt like at the leading up to it was that he was stalling on the, it is a stall position, staying grounded, and because that you're protected.
But while you're grounded, Jon, you can still get punched. You can still get kneed and kicked in the body. The action didn't have to stop because he was on his knees. He just couldn't get kicked in the head was the only rule. Kicked or kneed in the head.
Yes, I know, Frank. I'm just Demetrius Johnson actually said the same thing in the the Twitter afterwards, is basically that he was stalling on the.
Demetrius Johnson finished that with, and you should be allowed to knee a downed opponent. Come on, Demetrius. Okay, what do you want to do? Have no eye gouging, no biting, no other rules, no pads, no time limits, and go back to the original UFC? The fact they say not to kick or knee a downed opponent is because they can be seriously injured, and they're trying to protect the participants. I thought that was really stupid on DJ's part to go, and you should be allowed to knee a downed opponent.
I mean, there's no question that he broke the rules. I'm just saying that when he got hit, I felt like he was overplaying it. Now, here's the thing. First of all, I'm confused about why he was even really asked. It seems like that's something that you shouldn't actually allow a fighter to decide if if there's because somebody's.
Well, I think their cognitive assessment, they're not really asking questions to get the decision made by the fighter. That they're going to decide it. They're going to decide. The medical guy's they always ask, "Can you fight? Can you continue?" But they also are doing an assessment. So it might have been like he said, "Oh, I am ready to fight," and then they declare, "But you don't really look like you're ready to fight."
Well, that's exactly what happened. He said he wanted to fight, and tried to stand up and couldn't. But that was clear as I didn't see it clear as a bell. He said he wanted to fight. He said it 2 or 3 times, but then he couldn't get it together to get up. But he clearly said he wanted to fight.
But I understand by the rules. I certainly don't like the terminology, but this is partly how things are written. I think that the idea of an intentional foul, and this is just terminology to me, something like an eye poke that you think you might get away with, I don't think that somebody fouls intentionally knowing that it like in plain sight of everyone. I mean, but this is just like semantic.
I think what Frank's point was that you should know the rules. You know, like that's what makes it intentional. If you're the champion, you should know the rules, and not knowing the rules and breaking them, you got to pay a big price for that. The other thing is, I mean, it wasn't like a graze. It was a direct knee to the head. The head bounced back. So, you know, whether he was overplaying or not, I think the strike was very significant, and it should have ended either way. The thing now, though, is there's two things that happened post-fight. Well, first, Jan apologized, kind of PR apology afterwards. But then on his personal Twitter has nonstop gone after Sterling, criticizing Sterling's celebratory nature about it all. And Sterling's like, look, I didn't win the way I wanted to win, but I won fair and square. You disqualified yourself. I'm the champion. That's kind of Sterling's position, and Jan is just dogging him on Twitter. So it's a tough position for Sterling, because do you not celebrate? I mean, in the Frank, you noted in the ring he dropped the belt. He didn't want it that way, kind of thing.
There was no celebration in the ring.
Right. It
Later,
was when
it got through to him. Okay, this is a legitimate win. And by the way, there's no question of it being intentional. Let's not forget the referee clearly said, so much the audience could hear it on the television, he's down. He stood next to him and said, he's down. I heard it clear as a bell.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of Frank. I mean, the whole thing of intentional it's a complex issue in the ring. One of the things that I said in the previous show about this was like, I sort of like the cold nature, like the calculated thing, which he certainly did not demonstrate in this fight, went with the foul. But people losing the moment. Like, I don't think he went, you know what, he's down, but what I want to do is knee this guy in the head and get disqualified. Like the idea of intention of, I think he probably lost the moment and did something that cost him the fight and cost him the title.
But see, by that kind of lost the moment, you would have to let Tyson bite Holyfield's ear off, because he definitely lost the moment. He totally
I didn't say that he should have won the fight, because he
totally lost his temper, lost the moment, because he'd been headbutted over and over and over again, and he just lost it.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying that the idea of an intentional foul to me sounds like someone is trying to cheat, which I don't think he was trying to cheat. Certainly, I think he lost because he did a movement in the moment that broke all the rules.
Right. So the critique now, though, is, I mean, we remind ourselves that Jan's like 27, 28 years old. He's a young people. So there's also that component. But Jan has now kind of shown that he is not this cold, calm, humble figure that he has presented himself as on Twitter, with all these kind of comments. Like, if you're really a humble loser and you realize, hey, I fucked up, don't go on Twitter and start criticizing the guy for celebrating. The guy hasn't been going after you. So that's a little bit of a critique on his character post-fight. So if he wants to be the champion and act like a champion, don't fall into that McGregor champion style.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not like the only champion that's ever behaved like that, for sure.
No, it's just that people thought that he wasn't that type, and he turned out to be that type. By the way, I would argue with him being young. I mean, these days, where people stay home until they're 30, and when they're in their late teens, instead of being in the military facing death, they're headed for the safe room because their feelings have been hurt. Maybe 27, 28 is considered young. But I mean, for a long, long time, a man's fighting prime was considered 28 to 32.
No, I'm saying young in terms of decision making and just it's like supposed to,
I'm saying maturity. By that time you should be mature by your late 20s.
Oh, it's 2021.
You should be
Frank.
mature.
It's a different day and age, Frank.
As a matter of fact, a very wise woman, when I first was dealing with little kids, told me that being a parent is a job. It's totally separate from being that kid's friend. It's totally separate from making sure the kid has a really nice childhood. That being a parent is a job, and that job consists of, if when that kid hits 18 years old, they could leave the house and fend for themselves and be all right. You've done your job. And it doesn't matter if they stay home till they're 30, if they would be capable of going out and taking care of themselves at 18. I know I certainly was. I know John certainly was. But that's what parenting was. You were supposed to be mature enough to take care of yourself by 18, not 38. So I would not give him any excuses of being too young.
The other thing is this question of the fight next. So both of y'all have said that you would want to see that immediate rematch, but is there precedence for him not getting the immediate rematch because of an intentional disqualification? Is that kind of like a kind of slap on the wrist kind of thing that he doesn't get the, because usually you get the immediate belt contention if you're the champion and you lose fair and square, but he lost on kind of a different standing. So could that theoretically happen? Him not get the next fight with Sterling because of that?
Well, it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen because he didn't get a suspension. Usually when you do this sort of thing, like I said, you lose, you get a fine and a suspension, and the suspension is why you don't get the immediate rematch. Once they decide he was not going to be suspended, there's no reason to not give him the rematch. They've already left that open by not suspending him. So give him the rematch. Don't let somebody who thinks they want to jump in and make some money off of Sterling, and then he's got to beat somebody else for the title. Give him the rematch. It's logical. Once you don't suspend him, give him the rematch. And of course, who knows how long it will be before Sterling's allowed to fight again. Sometimes a guy gets a 6-month suspension and the other guy's on a medical suspension for the same amount of time, and it works out anyway. And then they fight each other. So it all has to do with the fact that he didn't get a suspension. So there's really no way to say that they're not going to give him a rematch because of this fight. Dana can always say he's not going to give him a rematch because he thinks he can make more money on somebody else, which would be typical. But there's no way to claim they're not going to give it to him because of the fight once it's worked out this way.
Yeah, so we'll see how that shakes out, and I'm sure either way it's gonna be interesting for the bantamweight to see what the next phase is for them. Go ahead.
So Shawn, you won the bet on who won the fight.
I got the most wins.
No, specifically on that one, I'm saying you won the bet, but would you make the same call on the rematch?
Yes, I think Sterling wins the rematch. I think Sterling now is going to go back and assess what he did. I think Sterling's game was good, and he had the right recipe for Jan. He just needs to figure out how to maintain that, either developing his cardio or doing more, whatever it is, being more efficient. But I think Sterling will actually come back and be the stronger champion. I think Jan is a massive fighter. I love him for his fighting skills, but I don't know. I think he doesn't. He was getting the night trips and those kind of takedowns, but he wasn't trying to get in the mix on the floor. I don't think I think that's telling that he might not feel as confident on the floor with someone like Sterling. And I think Sterling gets him to the floor more effectively the next time around.
I think it's interesting that in the lead up to the fight, one of the things that Sterling was doing was tagging Jan and with like some video of him training, basically suggesting that he was going to keep that pace for 5 rounds. That's what Sterling was pressing as an idea is you better be ready because this is what's coming. And then
I'm sure he thought he could, but it's like that tall girl thought she could stand with Amanda Nunez.
Right.
You don't know till you know. And it wasn't that he wasn't trained for cardio. I think he was trained that he could do cardio with most everybody for 5 rounds.
Yep.
But it was Jan's pressure. And it's one of those you don't know till you know. There's a lot of people he could have done that for 5 rounds with. But I think Jan broke it up by giving him a lot more pressure than he was used to and wore down his cardio. But I don't think he wasn't in shape. I think he had his
No, yeah, I
cardio
don't think he
up to
wasn't in
where
shape. Yeah,
I think he had his cardio up to where he could have done that for 5 rounds with a lot of other fighters.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
it was Jan's pressure that took all his energy. And because of that, I'd pick Jan in the rematch.
Yeah, I think Jan's going to win in the rematch, but
Well,
we'll
this
see
time
what
we didn't put
happens.
any money on it, but definitely next time we should because I'll make a nice killing on this.
Oh God, I can't do that. I just laid a bed with Goldie on politics, so I better not be doing any fight bets.
We could wager some knives or something. Um, that's probably more value
You
to me
got
than
knives
money.
to wager?
I'm gonna buy some. I can wager it up. All right, here we go. So let's go to some of the other fights just quickly to wrap up the episode. Some of the ones that stood out. So the other ones on the main card was the Islam Kid versus Drew Dober or Duber or whatever.
Stober, I think that went
Dober.
the way it was set up to go. It was meant to be a showcase for the Dagestani kid, and it was a showcase for the Dagestani kid. And they put him in with a nice, polite guy who was going to smile even after he got his ass kicked. So that looked really good. And Dober's a good striker, but this guy's apparently a really, really outstanding wrestler, as is his stablemate, Khabib. And they didn't throw him in with a top 10 guy. They took a guy that could look pretty good and had a good reputation for striking, but was still basically a journeyman.
So
They set it up as
is
a.
he the next Khabib, Frank? Like they've
I don't
been.
know that he'll. I don't know that he'll be Khabib, but he's going to be good. He's ready to stand there with the top 10 people and see what he can do. What can he do against Poirier? What can he do against Ferguson? What can he do against Gaje? We don't know because that wasn't who he was in with. But he's definitely good enough to be fighting those guys and probably should have been fighting them. But they wanted a showcase. They got a showcase.
Yeah,
My favorite fight of the night was Kai Kara France that I
that's my
thought was
boy. That's my
amazing.
boy.
I thought that was amazing. I mean, that guy took his back early, rode his back with a heavy, heavy figure four body lock, went for the rear naked choke about 200 different times, and Kai fights off the rear naked choke, rolls to the side that you have to do to make the guy's legs wear out to give up the body lock, gets up, and with a very short time left in the
Five
round,
seconds.
knocks the guy cold. That was my favorite fight of the night.
Yeah, I love Kai, and Kai comes out of this Izzy's camp, and it was just so remarkable. I mean, his it shows though too, because they were making commentary on it, that even though you're not in the dominant position when you're on the floor, whenever in fighting, you might not be in a dominant position, but your defense can work towards your offense, right? It's just a reminder, like good defense will pay dividends, and versus just always being on the offensive, always trying to find ways to get the better position. Sometimes being in the subdued position, especially on the ground, might work out in your favor, and I think it showed. We were
Well,
jumping,
it's
right,
also
John?
Oh yeah.
it's
I was shocked when he the finish was amazing because we were cheering for him but it didn't look good for him up until a few seconds, and then suddenly, holy smokes!
that just shows what you can do when you refuse to quit.
Right.
Many people would have gone and let it go because they've been fighting that choke for so long, and it's not easy. And it's fighting that choke and fighting that choke, and I think most people would have sort of mentally given up a little bit, and the minute you give up a little bit, the guy gets a choke on. And Kai Kara France didn't give up a second, not a second. He was fighting those chokes as hard as anybody possibly could, and it paid off big time. And it was
Our,
really a good thing to see that refusal to lose, refusal to
Mhm.
give up. I thought that was a strength of character that I really, really liked in him.
Speaking of of Adesanya's camp, did you see who won
Oh,
fight of the night? I'm like, how did this win fight of the night? So the
are you
guy Carlos
serious?
Obreg, from the Aussie, the Black Jag or New Zealand maybe,
Right.
versus the African Savage Kennedy Nzechukwu, I forgot to pronounce. Did you see that fight, Frank? The light heavyweight fight in the early prelims.
No, I didn't tune in till 8 o'clock. So I missed the early prelims between 6 and 8.
John,
I didn't even
what do you
know
think
they
about
were
that?
on.
So Frank, imagine two guys that basically hold like I mean the more athletic guy, the one from New Zealand, uh, basically would not keep his hands up at all. I mean, he looked dynamic as a striker, but he had no defense at all. And if he had kept his hands up at all, he probably would have won that fight. But the other guy did not look like a dynamic striker or whatever, but he was keeping his hands up, right, Shawn? And ultimately, yeah, like just not like a beautiful defense, but it was some defense, and that's all it took. But it literally was just a slugfest.
Yeah.
It did not seem like it
That's
should have
probably why he
gotten.
won Fight of the Night, because people like to see a slugfest. But
Exactly.
it wasn't really that great in terms of skill. I give it to the African Savage kid, which that name is a little wild, but I give it to him because he got hit a lot. He got hit a ton.
lot.
And he was able to stay in there, and I think he won. Right? Did he win the fight? I'm not even sure who won.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure he won he knocked the other guy out.
Oh yeah, that's right. He did knock him out. Oh my
But
gosh.
I mean, this is the thing. The guy wouldn't put his hands up. It was crazy. Like he looked like he had a ton of potential in terms of athleticism and everything. But how can you have made it to the UFC and have that bad of defense when you're primarily a striker?
Yeah.
People believe in their own hype. He's probably fought some really, really bad fighters, and he could do that and not get touched. And he just didn't know how to adjust when he fought somebody who could touch him. But I'd say I didn't see the fight, but that's what it sounds like to me, that he's gotten away with it in his local fights. And he kind of started to believe his own hype that he could do that against anybody. Whoops.
Yeah, it was his UFC debut, and he comes out of the Adesanya camp. He works the corner for Adesanya, so I'm sure he's a little inflated being part of that team. But in any case, that won the Fight of the Night. Dominic Cruz. How do we feel about the Dominic Cruz when it was a decision win?
Good,
We all had
solid
Dominic
Cruz. A good, solid Dominic performance. Getting to be typical, though. Dominic always has to complain about something and someone. The time before, he complained about the referee and said he smelled like tobacco and alcohol. And this time, apparently, he spent his whole post-fight thing complaining about the guy that works for the sponsor. But he actually, Monster Drink is looking at this guy, because he said the guy that Monster Drink has had as their representative in the UFC has been hustling the fighters and sort of hustling, getting pictures with them, and then putting stuff all over his personal social media stuff that he's like really good friends with people that he just sort of hustled into getting a photo with, and hustling them in general. And Dominic spent the time complaining about that, but it's got to be somewhat legitimate, because now Monster Energy Drink is investigating the guy to see what's up, which apparently some other fighters afterwards came up and said, yeah, that's what this guy
Adesanya
does.
always has the Monster Drink, one of their biggest kind of people who does exposure for Monster, and he didn't have it at the press conference, which is the first time I think they said in like his last 8 fights or something like that. So yeah, Monster's probably struggling.
Well, Monster's at the same time, Dana's like, we'll check this out, but Monster's one of our best. Apparently, they're making a lot of money off of Monster, and Dana doesn't want anything to interfere with that. But apparently, Dominic was telling the truth, because other fighters jumped right on the bandwagon. And I would imagine that if they can prove that that's what's up, this guy will be gone. But the relationship between Monster Energy Drink and the UFC will go on with a new representative to the UFC. But
John, go ahead.
It's typical of Dominic to, fight a good fight and then or not fight a good fight, but then instead of talk about the fight, have something he wants to complain about. It's like, I love Dominic. I think he's one of the best announcers that they've ever had. I love the way he can explain exactly what's going on with both fighters in minute detail. And I'd like to see him just announce and coach. But apparently he wants to still fight, which is, considering how easily he gets injuries, could be sad. But
yeah, I mean, so for those who don't know, his history is that he is arguably one of the top 5, if not top 3, or if not one of the best bantamweights of all time in the UFC. But he has gotten tons of injuries over the years, where significant periods, like we're talking like 4 or 5 years of no fighting kind of thing, or very few fights. So for him, even though he's a little bit older as a fighter, he feels like he hasn't got enough into the fight game. I mean, his record is not, damaged really. It's still a pretty strong record. Jon, though, you felt like his fighting was not the Dominic Cruz of old that you remember.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he had a huge break. It's not surprising that, and wasn't it? I think it was knee injuries that actually were what created that long break. But basically, his movement, he used to cover huge amounts of space in the octagon, and very dynamically, very quickly.
His own footwork that he made up, this figure 8 footwork, but the 8s used to be bigger.
And he was still using effective footwork, but it was not nearly as dynamic as it was in the past. But that, I mean, he had a huge break, and also, I don't know, like those.
Jon, but
knees are probably.
Jon, he had a break, but he's the major proponent and the only person that started this, pushing the idea that there's no such thing as ring rust. It doesn't matter how much time you have off. There is no such thing as ring rust. And that's Dominic's thing. So, he had a break, but he certainly isn't going to admit it was ring rust.
No. I wasn't talking about ring rust per se. What I'm saying is that he's been aging in all that time that he's been off also. And he, his knees are not what they once were. So I think that basically he sustained injuries and he never fully came back from them. And then what is it? It's like more than 5 years since he was fighting significantly, like on a regular basis, right? So
he had one major fight, which was against Cejudo, which he claimed was prematurely stopped by a referee who smelled of alcohol and tobacco.
Hey, I'm not really making excuses for him. I'm saying
no, I'm kind of making excuses for him. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually really did not like Dominic Cruz when he was in his prime. But then I liked him more as a commentator and everything during the layoffs. And now it's kind of sad to see somebody who trying to come back, but to me, it doesn't look like he's ever going to be able to recapture that that dynamic style that he had. Like, he's still good, but he's nowhere near the same level that he once was.
And he's a smart guy.
You liked him.
Go ahead.
I would have thought you would have liked him in his prime just because he was the Uriah Faber nemesis, and I know what you think of Uriah Faber.
Yeah, no, I mean, here's the thing. Just because I don't like one fighter doesn't mean that I automatically like whoever is the nemesis either. I mean, I found them both pretty arrogant, both Uriah Faber and Dominic Cruz seemed pretty arrogant back then. I mean, he was amazing. Like, there's no question. In his prime, the footwork and everything was ridiculous. It was he kind of had almost like that mystique of someone like an Anderson Silva or I can't think of it. Who's the Brazilian karate guy? Machida. Where there was a point where it seemed like he was almost like Matrix, like he could do incredible things that nobody else was they weren't even fighting in the same game as him. But that time has passed. This guy brought a lot to the fight. So, yeah. And I mean, do you know the fighter, Frank, that he fought against? It's not somebody I was familiar with, but
no, I never heard of the guy. Before.
I mean, it was a lot more competitive fight than I expected.
Yeah. Definitely.
The guy was a decent fighter, but he was new. Before we go, I'd like to you talk about injuries. It appears that poor Thiago Santos, either he hasn't come back in the last 2 fights or he's not going to come back, but all those knee surgeries certainly seem to have taken it out of him because his last 2 fights have been completely flat.
Right.
There was no more quick charging to get inside to get his hard punches and taking the guy out. There's no more quick charging, period.
Almost no
And
kicks
it's
too,
like,
which was notable because
yeah,
he was a strong kicker.
yeah. And it's like his knee injuries have really affected him. And I hope he can come back because, I mean, he went 5 rounds with John Jones and lost a decision that some of us thought that he should have won with after sustaining those knee injuries in the first round. So he's certainly ballsy and has been known to push through, but there's something has happened with his surgery that was being beyond the injuries, and he just doesn't seem to have it anymore. And
Yeah,
it's
I mean, he's
sad.
also turning 38 this year. I know we don't, Frank doesn't like to talk about age, but this there too. He's getting a little older, so it might have passed. His time might have passed, but we'll see. And so we'll wrap up the show here, but we have some big fights coming up that we'll probably be doing shows around. Maybe we'll do bonus shows just because there's so many good fights coming up, and we have some other good episodes and content we want to get out. So maybe we'll give like extra bonus episodes or something like that. But we have the heavyweight fight happening on March 27th. Saturday, March 27th, which is also going to be what is it? The lightweight? Is it lightweight? The belt?
Featherweight.
Alexander, yeah. So the
Australian
featherweight belt.
Pollock.
Yep. So that the ex rugby player, John's favorite. So that will be UFC 260 on March 27th, and then the one I'm really excited about too is a women's card. I mean, a women dominant card. 2 championship women's fights happening on April 24th. So we have
And 2 really, really entertaining women fighters.
Yes.
Valentina Shevchenko's defending, and Zhang Weiwei is defending.
Yes. And Zhang is facing Rose, which is going to be an awesome fight to see. So April 24th, I'm excited about that night for sure. So we'll wrap it up there. And if y'all have any thoughts or commentary, let us know for sure in the comments. I love to see what people have thought about the fact that Shawn won all the fight predictions. But we'll be back next week and enjoy the beautiful weather. We'll see you soon.
By the way, Zhang Weiwei's gonna crush that girl.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Rose Namajunas does not stand a chance against Zhang Weili.
Yeah, not a chance. But I like Rose, so I like her personality. So I'm excited to see the fight.
Oh, she's a nice girl, no doubt about that.
She gotta get her ass beat. All right, fellas, we'll see y'all soon.
Take care.
Bye bye.